325 AD, a gathering of Christian bishops in a small town near Constantinople that would change the course of Christianity as well as the Roman Empire. This gathering became known as the Council of Nicaea, not just a theological debate among bishops, but a collision of ideas about both imperial power and religious authority. At the heart of the meeting was the Roman Emperor Constantine, who wanted to both unite the Roman Empire and reshape the relationship between church and state. It's worth asking a few questions. Why was Constantine there? How did his decisions at the meeting at Nicaea influence the future of the Roman Empire and Christianity? We will explore the political and spiritual forces that collided to define a pivotal age on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 85, The Council of Nicaea. Folks, before we get started, I wanted to just mention that I may be out of commission for a week or two. If you really want to know, I ruptured my ACL playing basketball, and I'm going to be getting surgery, and I just might not be able to record a podcast for a week or two. So after this episode, there might be a week or two break, and then we'll resume with episode 86. In the meantime, feel free to check out my YouTube channel. There are some lectures up there, mostly focusing on the late Republic. I'm toying with the idea of doing a full podcast, maybe video lecture series on the Roman Republic, perhaps once I finish with this podcast, so you can check out some of my thoughts on that topic on the YouTube channel. If you'd like to listen to or read my book, Pax Romana, The Plague That Shook the Roman World, you can find that anywhere books are sold. There's an audiobook version, a Kindle version, a hardback version, and paperback will be arriving in about a month's time. So check out my YouTube channel, check out my book, and I look forward to getting back into podcasting after the break. For now, enjoy this episode. As you know, we've been talking about Constantine, and we left off discussing his conversion to Christianity, which occurred in 312 AD. The decade or so after that period marked a transformative chapter in Constantine's life. He transitioned from a regional ruler to the sole emperor over a unified Roman Empire. When Constantine defeated Maxentius in Rome in AD 312, he pursued a strategic alliance with the Eastern Emperor Licinius. And Licinius was in the midst of his own battle with one of the other emperors, Maximinus Daza, whom Licinius defeated in 313. So then together, Licinius and Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which I talked about on the last episode. That was a landmark decree that gave religious tolerance to Christians, restored the confiscated properties of the church, and which signaled a shift from persecution of Christianity to state support for the religion, reflecting Constantine's belief that divine favor was essential for the stability of the Roman Empire. The problem, of course, with any political alliance, and this is true of Constantine and Licinius's alliance, was that there was tension, there was difficulty communicating, and both emperors were not satisfied simply ruling their respective regions, Constantine in the west and Licinius in the east. One thing that probably kept Constantine, at least, out of war was his involvement in the Christian church. He engaged deeply with Christian affairs. There was the Donatist controversy in North Africa, where there was a schism in Carthage between the followers of a leader named Donatus and then the supporters of the elected bishop in Carthage. Donatus did not want religious leaders who had lapsed or who had effectively shown cowardice during the persecutions to be able to administer Christian sacraments like baptism and the Lord's Supper. Constantine really didn't understand this dispute. He, of course, sided, or at least it seemed that he sided with the non-Donatist faction, giving them some money to repair their churches. Of course, the Donatists saw this as the emperor favoring apostatized Christians, and they were deeply upset. And in the councils that followed trying to resolve this dispute, Constantine would issue his own views, ordering Christians to recognize clergy that had previously lapsed and allow them to administer the sacraments. The Donatists protested, they engaged in street violence. Constantine would ultimately order that any Christians, including the Donatists, who threatened peace and order in the empire, these would be prosecuted with the full weight of the state, even having church property confiscated. But Constantine was never able to fully deal with this splinter group from the church, and it would come to later emperors to try to reconcile these North African Christians with the rest of the church. Ultimately, Constantine had to acknowledge that there were some limits in his authority when it came to ecclesiastical matters. So that sets the stage for what happens in 324 AD when tensions between Constantine and Licinius finally erupted in civil war. Now, the Christian sources describe Licinius as a persecutor of Christians in the Eastern Empire. Most historians, however, consider Eusebius an exaggerator as a way to justify Constantine's aggression against him, because it was Constantine that actually launched the civil war. His troops fought Licinius's troops in a series of battles in Greece and then on the Bosphorus. Constantine's eldest son, Crispus, was the naval commander in those battles, helping to secure victory for his father. Licinius would be captured and then executed in Thessalonica. It was at this point that Constantine decided to commemorate his triumph and his sole rule over the Roman Empire by renaming the city of Byzantium as Constantinople, which we could translate as City of Constantine. He declared Licinius a tyrant and therefore annulled his laws, and then Constantine restored any properties or funds that were taken from the church in the East. Again, the extent to which the church had been damaged in the East is a matter of question among historians. And I'll say more about Constantinople in a future episode. But for now, I just want you to know that when the Council of Nicaea happens in 325 AD, it follows immediately on the heels of these two significant issues. One, the Donatist controversy and Constantine's inability to resolve it. And then two, Constantine's unification of the Roman Empire politically. So that gets us now to the Council of Nicaea, which was convened, as I said, in 325. Constantine clearly believed that the empire ought to be Christian. At the very least, if we're skeptical of Constantine's conversion, we might say that Constantine wanted a monotheistic empire. That would certainly be in line with what we saw of several earlier emperors like Aurelian, even Elagabalus to a certain extent, wanted the Romans to worship a single unifying divine force that would bind together a diverse imperial population in the sprawling Roman Empire. And of course, this was a time in which the empire had known decades and decades of political fragmentation and civil wars. And so Constantine probably thought that a single shared faith would foster cohesion, but also loyalty among his subjects. So it's in this context that we see Christianity, with its emphasis on one all-powerful God, offering a pretty compelling framework for achieving political stability and divine support of one single emperor. So Constantine's actions, when we look at the way he funded the construction of churches, his promotion of Christian leaders, all of this really underscored his commitment to aligning the empire with monotheism, if not specifically Christianity. This was a vision that, as I mentioned last time, was not merely spiritual, but it was also pragmatic, aiming to create a unified empire under one God and one emperor. So, How then do we get to the Council of Nicaea? Well, there was this controversy in the church at the time called the Arian controversy. At its center was a man named Arius, who was a Christian leader in Alexandria, city in Egypt. And Alexandria was a thriving intellectual and cultural hub in the Eastern Empire. There was a lot of debate and discussion. There were philosophers in that city. There was a sizable Jewish population. It was one of the major cities for generating ideas at this time. And so it was in this city that Arius argued that the Son, that is Jesus Christ, was a created being, that he was distinct from and subordinate to God the Father. In Arius's view, the Son had a beginning in time. He was not co-eternal with the Father. Obviously, this teaching implied that Christ was not fully divine, at least in the same way that God the Father was fully divine. Arius's ideas became popular in the Alexandrian church and beyond, and this stimulated a pretty serious theological debate. There was the Bishop of Alexandria, his name is easy to remember, it's Alexander, who was the main opponent of Arius, and he insisted that the Son, Jesus Christ, was eternal, was also of the same divine essence as the Father, and this unity between Father and Son was, in his view, central to Christian orthodoxy. So you have Arius on the one side, and you have Alexander on the other side. And Christian communities became divided, not just in Alexandria, but in the region and then across the empire. And this theological controversy could not have come at a worse time for Constantine. Again, he had just defeated Licinius and wanted to unite the Roman Empire under a single religion. And here these Christians, especially in Alexandria, but now in the wider empire, were all taking positions on some theological debate that Constantine probably did not care all that much about. And the emperor's initial hope seems to have been that these two parties could have been reconciled. And this probably derives from his very Roman take on religion. Hey guys, yeah, maybe one of you is right and maybe one of you is wrong. Maybe Jesus Christ was created, maybe he wasn't, maybe he's co-eternal, maybe he's not. But who really cares? We all kind of worship the same God still, right? We call him Jesus Christ. Can't we all just get along? Constantine actually sent letters to both Arius and Alexander urging them to reconcile. I'm going to go ahead and read a section of that letter, and you can really get a sense of just how annoyed Constantine is with these two men. Quote, "As far then as regards divine providence, let there be one faith, one understanding among you, one united judgment concerning God. But as to your subtle disputations on questions of little or no significance, though you may be unable to harmonize in opinion, such differences should be confined to your own private minds and thoughts. And now let the preciousness of common affection, let faith in the truth, let the honor due to God and to the observance of his law remain immovably among you. Resume your mutual feelings of friendship, love, and respect. Restore to the people their customary embraces, and you yourselves purify your souls, as it were, and once more acknowledge one another. Restore to me, then, my quiet days and untroubled nights, that the joy of undimmed light, the delight of a tranquil life, may be my portion from here on." End quote. That is Constantine in his letter to Alexander and Arius, as found in Eusebius's Life of Constantine, Book 2. There's actually a lot more in that letter, but I think that passage gives you a pretty good sense of the tone of Constantine. Number one, these are not important disputes. Who really cares? Second, he's tired of it. He's annoyed. He wants to be able to fall asleep again. He's just united the empire. In fact, when Constantine opens up this letter, this is how he names himself: the Victor Constantine, the Great Augustus. That's the title that he uses. He describes himself as the Victor, which is a direct reference to his victory against Licinius. So for Constantine, the whole Arian controversy is a non-issue, and it is just an annoyance. He wants to have public order again. He doesn't want a schism in his church. He's just united the empire. he wants the church to stay united as well. And I think his downplaying of these theological nuances really reflects his pragmatism, the same pragmatism I mentioned in the last episode. He was less concerned with doctrinal precision than with the practical consequences of a major division in the church. But this initial attempt at reconciliation failed. The controversy would only deepen its spread, like I said, to engulf the entire Christian world. And this escalation set the stage for Constantine to take a more decisive step. And that was convening the Council of Nicaea the next year in 325 AD in an attempt to resolve the dispute once and for all. So let's go ahead and talk about the council itself. It was a carefully orchestrated event, even down to where the council was held. Because initially, the council was going to be held in Ankara, which is where the modern city of Ankara, Turkey, is to this day. This was a significant ecclesiastical center. It was the city of a powerful anti-Arian bishop. But Constantine had the location shifted to Nicaea, which is in the northwest of Asia Minor, right near his court in Nicomedia, which would allow Western bishops to attend more easily. The transportation network by both road and sea was more convenient to Nicaea, but also Constantine himself would not have to travel as far. And I have to think that that was part of his motivation as well. There was also Eusebius of Nicomedia, who was a sympathizer with Arianism, and Eusebius had Constantine's ear and probably convinced Constantine also to move away from Ankara, where there was fierce anti-Arian sentiment. All right, so that's how we get to Nicaea. How many people actually attended? Well, the Council of Nicaea was attended by an unprecedented number of Christian leaders, about 300 bishops. And Constantine made that happen by providing the bishops access to the cursus publicus, which was a kind of state-run transport system, allowing those bishops, including bishops in the West, to use the system to get to Nicaea. There were far more bishops from the East than those from the West. There were also far more Trinitarian bishops rather than Arian bishops. So despite Constantine's desire to have broad representation from the empire, and by the way, 300 bishops, while that is an unprecedented number, was definitely less than half, if not maybe even less than a third of the total number of Christian bishops in the Roman Empire at this time, although we don't really know exactly how many bishops were in the Roman Empire. We're very fortunate to have a record of the Council of Nicaea from Eusebius of Caesarea. He is different than the Eusebius of Nicomedia. Eusebius of Nicomedia was that Arian sympathizer who persuaded Constantine to move the council to Nicaea. But Eusebius of Caesarea is the famous church historian who wrote both a history of the church, but also a biography of Constantine, which I've already quoted to get that letter from Constantine to Alexander and Arius. So Eusebius of Caesarea, the historian, kept a record of the Council of Nicaea, and that's why we know so much about it. Now, as I said a little while ago, this was a highly orchestrated, choreographed event, and I have to think that part of the purpose of this council was to show these bishops that Constantine had a right to ultimately decide orthodoxy. That ultimately these bishops were like senators giving him advice and debating in front of him, and then he would ultimately judge and rule. We even see this in the way that he is described entering the council by Eusebius. So this is a lengthy quote from Eusebius's life of Constantine describing the emperor's entrance into the council. Quote, "He finally walked along between them like some heavenly angel of God, his bright mantle shedding luster like beams of light, shining with the fiery radiance of a purple robe and decorated with the dazzling brilliance of gold and precious stones. Such was his physical appearance. As for his soul, he was clearly adorned with fear and reverence for God, This was shown by his eyes, which were cast down, the blush of his face, his gait, and the rest of his appearance, his height, which surpassed all those around him, by his dignified maturity, by the magnificence of his physical condition, and by the vigor of his matchless strength. All these, blended with the elegance of his manners and the gentleness of imperial condescension, demonstrated the superiority of his mind surpassing all description. When he reached the upper end of the rows of seats and stood in the middle, a small chair made of gold having been set out, only when the bishops assented did he sit down. That's Eusebius's Life of Constantine, as translated by Avril Cameron. Constantine arrives in this way which reinforced his authority and the gravity of the council. Following that, he delivered an address urging the bishops to resolve this dispute and any others and to become unified. Constantine had a broader goal of aligning Christian cohesion with the empire's political needs for unity. Evidently, Constantine proposed to the bishops that Jesus Christ was of the same substance and that this would be language that would bring some kind of reconciliation. Now, Constantine does not have much, if any, theological training, but this intervention, this idea of the same substance, actually helped guide the council to develop what would be known as the Nicene Creed, which declared Jesus Christ, the Son, as begotten, not made, and co-substantial with the Father. In other words, this creed affirms the full divinity of Christ. And most bishops that were at the Council of Nicaea felt that they could endorse this statement. Arius, however, could not endorse this statement along with a few other bishops. As a result, Arius was deposed and exiled, and this creed would become an established standard for orthodoxy in the Christian church and is still the case to this very day. What we see in the Council of Nicaea is Constantine redefining church-state dynamics in the Roman Empire. The emperor now can summon councils. He can influence the decision of those councils. There is, in effect now, an embedded imperial power in the government of the Christian church. It was also the case that Constantine elevated bishops, giving them prestige, resources, and roles that are very similar to senators. And it's no surprise that over the 4th century, many elites flocked into church leadership rather than to political leadership, although in some ways, church leadership became political leadership, but we will talk about that another time. It's incredible to think that leaders in the Christian church were, even just a few years earlier, victims in the Roman Empire. They were a persecuted minority. They faced property confiscations and torture and death, and now here they are being treated like the most important people in the empire just below the emperor. Constantine, over the course of his reign, would grant bishops access to imperial resources, funds for church construction. He would allow them to distribute oil and food and wine to their congregations, even to entire towns and cities. Constantine would also grant bishops judicial powers, allowing them to arbitrate disputes. This gave them a kind of formal authority within the Roman legal framework. Bishops could resolve civil cases. People in a lawsuit did not actually have to go to a judge anymore. They could just appeal to a bishop. Obviously, these shifts marked a profound change in the dynamics of church and state in the Roman Empire. They positioned the emperor as a central figure, but also gave tremendous power to church leaders. And so the church underwent a pretty dramatic transformation, including major structural growth. The church hierarchy began to fill out as bishops that adopted a more civic-oriented role became, in effect, administrators or governors that required large staffs of subordinates. And there became a difference between men who led small churches, and men who effectively were like senators. We also see these regular councils begin to crop up, just like Nicaea, in order to help Christian leaders resolve theological disputes and maintain the unity of the church. And we see here a model for the emperor himself. He not only governed secular affairs, but also convened councils, he legitimized bishops, and he enforced doctrinal orthodoxy. That's exactly what happened at Nicaea, and it was a power that future emperors would also take upon themselves, making the church a kind of cornerstone of the Roman Empire and the legitimacy of the emperor himself. Emperors could now present themselves as the representative of the Christian God on earth. So, Constantine's actions at the Council of Nicaea were transformative, marking a watershed moment in Christian history. He was an active leader, summoning hundreds of bishops, providing imperial resources, and even intervening in the theological debate itself with this idea of one substance. It was he who would enforce the exile and political punishment of Arius and his followers, although, as we will see in future episodes, Constantine's enforcement would ultimately be fairly lax. But Constantine had other matters to attend to besides religion, and that is the construction of a new capital, Constantinople, the city of Constantine, a city that Constantine envisioned as a second Rome, maybe even as a superior to Rome. But we will talk about the rise of Constantinople and the shift of Roman power from west to east in the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocor. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.